What was the moment when you felt you had to make your views known?
Thank you, first of all, for having me, and thank you all so much for coming. It's such a privilege to be here. And look, I think I've been awake now for 36 hours, so I might need an English translation behind me as well, so let me see how I go. I also just want to pay tribute to the panel that came before us. That was unbelievable. You are the most incredible people, and it was such an honour to sit and to listen, and it was hosted so beautifully as well, so thank you, thank you. The moment for me, I mean, I hosted a TV show that was an opinion show, and I covered foreign affairs and politics and national security, defence. So it was something I was always going to cover extensively. Did I think for a second that me coming out a couple of days later, given what occurred on October 7, that I would come out staunchly in condemnation of the terrorists who committed the atrocities, and even more staunchly in support of the victims of the atrocity, and that would be controversial and I would be in the minority? I would have said, you're dreaming. But what I did was come out and say exactly what I thought. And you know, I don't think I even had a Jewish friend back then. I've got lots now, which is lovely. But I'd never been to Israel. I had no personal connection, but I think for me, the images that I saw and the things that I read and witnessed, and this was before seeing all the raw vision and unedited vision as well, was absolutely sickening on a level that I hadn't experienced before. And so I came out and I completely condemned it, and I stood staunchly by Israel's side, and I got completely annihilated in a way that I didn't think would be possible in a Western democracy, a country like Australia. But the next week, I did a weekly show, I got back up there, I looked down the camera and I went twice as hard, because you can't scare me away from the truth, and it's the truth.
Were you shocked by the fact that people were so critical of you?
I was, absolutely. I think I must have been completely naive to whatever it is that existed under the surface, and this vile hatred. I'd never experienced anything like it. You know, I was the first woman to host a rugby league and football in Australia, and that, you know, I got trolled online pretty badly, and, you know, I thought that was quite intense until this kind of stuff, and you know, the level of stuff that was coming and the nature of it, the ferocity of it. I had to give my child to her father for a period. He's a policeman, because the threats were deemed to be legitimate. And
threats of violence?
Absolutely.
Like what?
Oh, against her school, bombs, where we live. And I say that not in a way that I would want to garner pity. I mean, you live in a country where they are a daily occurrence, but was I surprised in my own country that this was occurring? Absolutely. The Sydney Opera House, before an IDF boot had hit the ground, we had people celebrating the massacre, celebrating, cheering, screaming, "Gas the Jews, F the Jews." I'm an immensely proud person when it comes to my country. My dad was a Major General in Australia and then a Senator, and he was in fact the most voted for individual politician in Australian history. He still is. He was an incredible human being, an incredible ally of Israel. And so I'm an incredibly proud person, patriotic person, but that was the first time I think I felt real shame when it came to my country and the way that we had reacted to what had occurred.
So do you think the fact that your father, Jim, was a military man, changed your perspective? Because, you know, we sat at the table and watched this panel, and you saw Tzvika's words. Tzvika is a dear friend, and I think it touched everyone deeply. We as a society understand that if personal pain becomes the decisive factor of everything, we would not survive here, and we would not be able to tell our sons and daughters, when we send them to war, what they are fighting for. Do you think that the fact that you grew up you moved from place to place with your father. You've been to 16 schools, right? Is that right? That's what Wikipedia says, at least. Do you think that...
I was only kicked out of a couple. The others were due to the military moving.
Do you think that growing up with a soldier father changed your perspective?
Oh, incredibly. It shaped so much of my perspective. It shaped so deeply the person that I am today. And we were in Indonesia for many years, 7 or 8 years I grew up there. I spent a large chunk of my childhood there. And we were there in 1998, so I watched a country stand up and fight after a dictator, essentially. President Suharto had ruled for 30-odd years. I watched people take to the streets. I watched students be shot at Trisakti University. I watched people fight for something that we took for granted back home at a very young age. You just mentioned, what are we fighting for? And I think one of the things that I think about often when it comes to my beautiful dad, and we lost him a couple of years ago to cancer, and I still get very emotional because he was my world, and he was, it hurts just as much today as it did the day he died, but it's such a privilege to feel so much pain, and I love talking about him, so thank you for letting me talk about him. But he would talk to us, thank you, about war, and he went to Iraq and Afghanistan. He actually ran the war in Iraq for a year, so he went to Iraq, and General Petraeus, the American general, identified him about a week in and said, this guy's got to run the war, and he was chief of operations for the US coalition forces. So he knew what war was, and he was never the kind of general that would sit back and send his troops out. They used to call him Drugs Molan, and not because he'd ever done drugs, he hasn't. I don't think, actually. He probably did. Am I being naive? I don't.
Maybe he hasn't
told
you
everything. Maybe he grew up in the 70s. Maybe he did, yeah. But they used to call him Drugs Molan because they'd say he's got to be on drugs, because he would never ask his troops to do anything that he wasn't willing to stand right by their side and do. And when we would talk to him about war, he would explain to us, you know, I'm going off to fight so that you can walk to school in the morning, and so that you can go play in the park, so that I can protect this incredible, amazing quality of life, this freedom, this democracy that we have here in Australia. And I don't think we quite understood that when we were younger, but I look at your situation now, and I look at your sons and your daughters losing their life, and what are they fighting for? What are they dying for? So the terrorists can come back and kill their kids and kill their brothers and kill their sisters. You know, Israel is being forced to endure a lifestyle that no other country in the world ever would. No other Western country, no other country that tries to tell you that you should and demands that you continue this cycle would ever tolerate the kind of existence that you have here. And my heart breaks for you.
Thank you so much.
It's crazy, yeah.
Erin, you're a mother, and you know, having children is a bet on the future. It's an expression of optimism. So do you know that this society in a siege among a huge region of enemies has more children than any Western society? We have 3.4 children per woman. Wow. It's below 2.1 in most democracies. So despite everything, this society is more optimistic than any society in the West.
Well, this is I mean, I look at what you've endured as a people and as a nation, and I think you should be in the fetal position crying, you know, but you're the complete opposite. And I am constantly exposed to examples of people who show more strength than I could ever imagine showing. And I am, even just this panel tonight, I just sat there and went, how do you even function, let alone function in a way that is inspiring and empowering, and so much spirit to fight and to, it's just, it is mind-blowing. Your people, and I know it's through sheer necessity a lot of the time, but I'm so inspired by you.
That's amazing. Were you ever interested in Israel before that? What was the size of Israel on your mental radar before October 7?
It was small.
It was small.
Similar to how it is in real life, yeah. Look, I was a sports host for many years, so As I said, so I only kind of entered the news. I mean, I've always loved it and been very passionate about it. And look, I guess had a degree of knowledge. Dad and I would talk about things that were happening all over the world, but definitely nowhere near to the extent that I do now. But funnily enough, when maybe 6 months ago or so, Mum sent me this screenshot from an article. So Dad had come to Israel in 2014 as part of a contingency of retired generals from the US, Britain, and because that's what we do, obviously. We send generals to check up on our democratic allies. Again, ridiculous. I overuse that word, but it's the only one that works. But Dad had come to investigate the conflict of the year before, and the headline of the report that this group of generals have put together, and this was post-Dad running the American war in Iraq for a year against ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc. And the headline of this article, and anyone who knows the ABC in Australia will realise that they would have hated writing this passionately because they are not our friend. It said, "They put us to shame in how they conduct war." And he went through all the civilian casualty minimisations and Dad was a blunt person. He didn't suffer fools, and he was, honest. His moral compass was second to none. And he went through in the ways in which Israel was superior to how the US had fought under his command in Iraq. And it's interesting to look back, because I wasn't as engaged then, obviously, when I was doing a completely different job. But that was such a special moment for me to see, and I've struggled to feel close to him since he passed away. People would say, "Oh, you can still talk to him in your head," but this has helped me, I think, in a lot of ways feel. I feel like he would be deeply proud, and I hope he would be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Israel is just another country on the map, a small one, and you have your job on TV. And one day this horrible thing happens, and you feel you have to call it out, and you're not willing to go with the crowd and just ignore it. And then Israel becomes an important thing in your life. It becomes a character. It becomes an event in your life. And it costs you a lot to protect Israel. It began with just expressing your opinion. Yeah. Suddenly you find yourself in a fight. Was it worth it?
Oh, absolutely. Every day of the week. Every day of the week, every second of every day of every month of every year. I'm smart enough to realize that nothing ever ends with Israel. I realized straight away, and it wasn't so much the events of October 7, which were utterly depraved on every level, I don't need to tell you. It was the reaction of the world that terrified me beyond comprehension. And that's when I realized this is existential. This is not a fight that we can afford to just kind of bury our head in the sand. And people in Australia might think we're far away, this doesn't involve us. It absolutely does. You look at any Western nation in the world and it's already begun. People are saying, oh, it's happening quickly. No, it's already begun. The threat is incredibly real. The threat of losing what we value and the things that we hold close, and life and freedom, democracy, love, peace, all these incredible things that Israel upholds amongst so many others who don't. And that is absolutely at threat. So I'm immensely proud to stand with Israel. I look at Israel and I think you are doing the hardest job in the world on behalf of all of us, and I'm immensely grateful. And no, you're not going to be perfect. No, not everything is going to be, obviously nothing in the world ever is, but your right to live without that evil on your doorstep is such an important right for you to realize and to grab a hold of and to own, because you have that right. Nobody else in the West would live the way you were forced to live. Carrying a gun, no one else would tolerate it. America wouldn't tolerate it, but their previous administration would tell you, you have to. You have every right to live safely and peacefully.
It would be nice if we can get some water for our guest from the organizer, from production. Erin, I don't pretend to be objective, but I think you're absolutely right, that this war is not just a local affair. It's around this war, there is a whole
Thank you
war
so
of
much.
ideologies, which I think touches on every democracy in the world. It's the war between the woke, who are refusing to call evil by name, and the defenders of the values of the West, who are playing defense in too many places. And I think that the fact that we are now faced not only with a military machine, but also with the condemnation of NGOs, the New York Times, the woke everywhere, we need to defy them. It is crucial that we show that a democracy can defend itself rather than bow down before barbarians in the name of some culture relativism.
It's suicidal empathy. And this is, you look at, this is an example from Australia. There's a woman who tried to get a bloke in her workplace sacked because he called another woman darling in the coffee room, called her darling. The next week, she's flying a Hamas flag yelling Free Palestine. So according to her principled feminist stance, and she calls herself a feminist, a guy who calls a woman darling must be cancelled, moved out of a workplace and punished. But Hamas, who murder, rape, slaughter, kill children, oh no, they're completely fine. They're not even clever at hiding their own, they're so...
We need more context. We need more evidence. We're not sure
the context. There is no context. They're evil terrorists and they slaughtered innocent people. There's no context. I don't need any more context. I don't need a second more context.
So
and in fact, when people say to me, but what about context? It didn't start on October 7. I say, really fair point. Hamas has been trying to kill Israelis for ages before that too. You're right, it didn't start before October 7, on October 7. They've been consistently trying to murder Israelis and Jews. It terrifies me because there are people who I encounter who are otherwise smart, kind, fairly rational people who have fallen victim to this, I don't think it's sophisticated, I think it's ridiculous, but this propaganda machine, you know, it's so powerful and so damaging. But I genuinely feel like there's been a shift. I really do. I feel like even in my own interactions, and I now speak to a very global audience through the show that I do on X, and there really has been, I say this and then I get deeply disappointed afterwards, but I feel like there has genuinely been a shift.
Do you feel that you are able to convince people?
I love speaking to people like you because you love me, but I'm wasted speaking to people like you, so I'm the first to acknowledge that. My work is to speak to people who either are not Jewish, not Israeli, who maybe are just in that space where they don't understand. And this is who, whenever I do a video, and the reason my videos are quite unique in that they're not, I'm trying to be emotive and I'm trying to touch people who have a sense of humanity but are falling victim to propaganda. And in my mind, I think of a single mum in Western Sydney in Australia who's got 3 kids, she's struggling cost of living, working 4 jobs to make ends meet. She hears on the ABC and the radio on the way home, day, and this was an actual headline, I kid you not, day 472 of Israel's illegal invasion of Gaza. That is how our ABC reports on this conflict. So you think about her, she's not me, she's not living this day to day because she's engaged and she's passionate and she cares. She's not you guys, she doesn't have family, she thinks it's far away. She'll get the shopping out of the car and she might think, oh God, those awful Israelis, I saw those kids in Gaza dying on the news, and that shapes her narrative. So what I'm trying to do is show people that, and I am leading the pack in this way in terms of how I feel, my fight is as much for kids in Gaza as it is for anyone else. I just understand who their enemy is, and that is Hamas. And I get examples every now and then that keep me going between all the death threats and the attempts to annihilate, et cetera, and one person who I love as an example is just a 50-year-old miner from Australia sent me an email saying, I've just watched one of your videos and I just wanted you to know that my morals and my values have not changed, but the side I now realise they align with has. Thank you. And I rang him, I wrote back and said, oh, that's amazing. And he said, I just kept thinking, I care about kids so much. and I care about kids being bombed. I said, so do I. So do I. So do Israel. So I've not met a Jewish person whose heart does not break at the thought of babies dying. It's not, this is not a revenge mission. Hamas have promised to continue the atrocities the first opportunity they get, and they still have hostages. Israel is not there for revenge. They're there to annihilate a threat, bring back their people, and survive. And I'm getting enough feedback to feel like that message is starting to get through.
Can you understand and explain to us what the logic of those who berate you for protecting Israel, the intelligent ones? I don't mean the people who have arguments. What what is their belief, and what does it come from? Is it anti-Semitism?
I look at it, I think there's three groups. There are people who are sensible, smart, common sense, who understand this and who believe in all the things that we believe in, who stand with Israel. And I genuinely believe that is the majority of people in Australia. There's then a group who are not engaged and who are neither here nor there. Australians are lazy by nature as well. We're not going to get out and protest, or do events to support. We just won't be engaged either way. And then you've obviously got your useful idiots, your legitimate, evil, anti-Semitic, just vile vultures that you're never going to change, or because they don't care about the truth. They don't care about what actually happened. They don't care about who the real enemy is. So you write them off essentially. But I think for most people who don't see it this way, it is legitimately because they consume their news. So let me give you another example, and this is important because I used to work at Channel 9 News. I was a sports presenter for 15 years, and it's the highest rating show. And I'm using Australia as an example because that's what I understand. So people will watch. It's 7 and 9 compete, but it's the highest rating show every night. It's the 6 p.m. news on both channels. Now, after I think it was maybe the second hostage release prisoner exchange, the opening line on Channel 9's news was something to the effect of, so they had this emotional music, and the first image that was shown was not of a hostage, was not of an Israeli person being freed. It was of a Palestinian prisoner reunited, and the reporter's voice said something to the effect of, back in the arms of his family, emotions ran high. And his mother's there crying and his kids on his shoulders. And if you're just sitting at home watching, you're being told essentially, now they're not saying anything wrong. Emotions are high and he's back with his family. But what they're not telling you is that he blew up a bus 15 years ago that killed 12 people. But so in the mind of Australians sitting at home who are not otherwise engaged in this, they don't have the capacity or the interest or whatever it is, and that's shameful, I know, but this is how a lot of people live. They look at that and go, and then there was a line, and then, the hostages were returned at the end. So that's subtly shaping a narrative that the people, so I feel like it's not malicious in a lot of ways. It's not an excuse at all. There's not an excuse, but that's the highest rating show in Australia, and that is the way the narrative is being framed, that but they're omitting essential information that would then make people go, oh, wait a minute, I'm not going to feel empathy for him. He's a scumbag piece of I don't know if I can swear, but you know what I was going to say.
Feel free. You're at home.
Okay, bless you. But I think that is the biggest battle that we face. And don't get me started on the BBC and CNN. And can I tell, I just saw something online, and I'm not sure if this is true, but it was from someone fairly legitimate. The only network in America, apparently, that covered the missile landing near the airport was Fox. Not one other network apparently covered a democratic ally in the Middle East, Israel, having a missile explode right near its busiest airport. That is, it's embedded. It's so deeply embedded. So I feel like that contributes significantly to the reaction we've seen globally.
Yeah, to a great extent, the media is the problem. And I think, there's an argument going on between left and right saying, well, your media is biased towards the left, but your media, Fox News, is biased towards the right. And I think there's still a difference. I think the media on the left have convinced themselves that their mission is not to describe the world, but to improve it. And in order to improve it, they allow themselves to distort the news in order to educate.
And therein lies the irony, because what they're doing is the complete opposite of improving it. And that's this suicidal empathy. They're doing the complete opposite. If all those, and I'm not a right-wing nut job at all. I'm conservative when it comes to the economy, national security, defence. I'm progressive socially. I've got a gay brother. I'm just common sense, right, is how I would describe it. But this whole, you look at the reaction of world leaders who are trying to make the world better, or networks who lean left, or wokes, or whatever you want to call them. Their empathy, apparently, towards Hamas and people in Gaza has prolonged this pain for far, far longer than it ever would have been prolonged if they had come out on October 8 and said, we do not accept that, return the hostage. You know, if every nation, every leader, every body, UN, if they had all come out vehemently, but instead, through the guise of empathy and caring and being delicate, they empowered and emboldened a group of terrorists who want to destroy not just Israel, but all of us in the West. You couldn't make, if you made it up, people would say, no, that's silly, no one will believe that. But that's what they've done.
You know, when our Prime Minister spoke before the joint session of the two houses of Congress, he said, this is not a clash of civilizations. This is a clash of barbarism and civilization. And he said, our war is your war. He said to America, our enemy is your enemy, and our victory will be your victory. Do you feel that there is a way to convince Australians, if you think it's so, that we are fighting on the front line of Western civilization, and that this war in other ways is going on in other societies?
Look, I think the sad reality is it almost has to happen closer to home before a lot of them wake up. A lot of them are already acutely aware of the threat. But I look back at Christmas. So last Christmas, we have this tradition in Melbourne. I know there's a lot of Melbourne people here, where you go and look at the Maya Christmas windows. And that's something that even if you're a kid in Sydney or Canberra or Brisbane, you generally once in your life will go and look at the Maya Christmas windows in the Melbourne city. Spectacular, beautiful, lots of moving parts, lots of lights. This year, it was cancelled because of pro-Palestinian marches. And they said, you cannot celebrate Christmas while there's a genocide in Gaza. So Australians were not able to celebrate Christmas in a way that we have traditionally done as a nation forever. And I thought, surely this has got to be it, because this isn't, you know, it's not just, it's not Gaza, it's not Israel, this is Australia. And it might sound like a minor thing, and I understand that in the big scheme of things and what you guys face, it's completely minor. But how is that not a complete wake-up call that these people don't give a flying cahoot about children in Gaza? They could not care less about children in Gaza or children anywhere. They want to destroy all the things that we value here, in Australia, in America, everywhere else. And I just feel like if that's not enough of a wake-up call, I mean, what is? My fear is that it will need to get significantly worse and closer to home. And I feel like
Sadly.
once that starts,
Sadly.
Did you see how many people we've taken in from Gaza? Thousands we've taken in since October 7, without the proper security checks. So if Australia, I mean, in terms of things happening closer to home or having people living amongst us who don't believe in what we believe in, yeah, I'm scared.
You now have a woke government that just won an election. You have Palestinian refugees. You didn't have refugees from Syria, right?
No.
Australia did not accept any. So now you have these, and you have a woke Labour government that just won an election. How do Jews in Sydney, where you live, feel?
They're devastated. And I mean, I live in a very Jewish area, and I now, as you'd be aware, have a lot of Jewish friends, and they're scared and they're devastated. I think they feel deeply let down by a country that they embraced, by a country that they've contributed to immensely. Every person I know in that community is an incredible person who has been an incredible part of the community, and they now look at this election result. In some ways, there's one way that's a positive that I'll explain in a second, but for the most part, you know, Penny Wong, our foreign minister, who has just been so appalling, and not only did she, I mean, her list of things that she has done that has failed, and I'm not going to say Jewish Australians, she's failed Australians in this way. It's a long list. Since the war, she has been horrific, but then went to the Holocaust. You know, and the Jewish people in Australia said, we do not want her to go to represent us, the commemorations. And she went. Even that, to me, I just thought, given all the things that she'd done prior, I think it's a real slap in the face. I think they feel deeply let down. The only positive that I take out of it, the Greens, who are vile beyond reproach, pretend to care about the environment, but every slogan, every poster they had was, you know, Gaza, Free Palestine. They based their entire campaign on it, essentially, nothing else. No climate change, they've forgotten entirely about that. And hating Israel. That was essentially, and they have almost been annihilated, and the leader might lose his seat. So that, to me, in some way, comforts me a little bit, but the return of the Labor government does not.
Is it dangerous for Jews in Sydney? Because, you know, in Paris or in Malmö or in Berlin, in many other European cities, Jews are advised not to wear a kippah and not to carry the Star of David. Is it unsafe for Australians, Jews?
I think the past few months would say that it is. You know, there's been too many instances of attacks, of graffiti, of cars being firebombed, of synagogues being burnt. It's crazy. And it's, you know, it's intimidation and it's vile. And I look at the response to it all, and you look at those nurses. You would have all seen the videos of those nurses. And look, at least in some way, there's been charges and there's a process there. But I go all the way back to the Opera House, the incident that I'm sure you'll all remember. And that incident was, you know, beamed around the world. Had our Prime Minister come out that night or the next day or even the day after that and so staunchly and vehemently condemned it and said, this is not who we are as a country, this is not what Australia represents, we will not allow this on our soil. And then if we had actually enforced laws and legislation that exists, not against free speech, but hate speech and inciting of violence, which it was, both things, it was hate speech and incitement of violence. If one person had been punished, two, even a slap on the wrist, the deterrence factor was at least there. The other people who had it in them would have looked at that and gone, oh, okay. But they looked at that, and a week later they went, not one person yelling, gas the Jews, or, you know, incitement to violence has been punished. Next week, not one person. Next week, not one person. Oh, it's a free-for-all. You know, our leadership has failed immensely to set a tone and a standard. And because of that, Australians who are vile, evil, anti-Semitic people have felt empowered and encouraged to continue with this. And the Jewish community in Australia have been the greatest losers in all of this. And yeah, it's really hard for them.
That's terrible. I have one more question before moving back to the personal to end our conversation. And that's, you know, my colleague, Mike Duran, says that elites can be anti-Semitic in the United States. We know anti-Semitism on the left. On the left, it's mainstream. But now we see Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, even Joe Rogan has begun to waver. And I asked him about it, and he said, this is just the elites. The American people, the common people, are not anti-Semitic. Their heart is in the right place. Would you say that about Australians too?
Absolutely. Australians are genuinely, inherently good people, very decent people. They believe in all the things that you believe in here. The issue is, and I mean this very, very genuinely, when I was covering car racing, the Bathurst 1000, a very famous Australian race, I would get 1 minute 20 in a news bulletin as a young reporter to do my report on 10 hours of racing. And 99% of those cars would whir around perfectly. And maybe 4 cars would have massive crashes. And the only 4 cars that made it into my package, because that was spectacular and that was, you know, it was happening and it was clickbait and people were watching, were those 4 cars. And I look at it in terms of the media coverage in Australia, it's not representative of the majority, no way.
That is great.
Yeah, and I hope you believe that. I genuinely do believe that.
So she represents the real Australia. Just
I do.
Erin, if we hug now in parting, it will be all over the news, the picture, for reasons I can't tell you. I can't tell you why. But I don't think I can resist this. So thank you so much for standing with Israel. Thank you so much for coming here. And the love you feel is real.